All right, we are moving along. So this is lesson 1.13, the first of two lessons that are going to be on the 1.15 quiz. And this one is focused on properties of substances, and specifically being able to tell physical properties and changes from chemical properties and changes. So, physical properties are things that you can measure and observe having the matter right in front of you. All right? So, you can measure its melting point, its boiling point, its freezing point, things like that. You can measure its density. So you can take its mass, measure its volume, and figure out its density. You can throw a magnet next to it and see if the magnet sticks to determine if it's magnetic. All right? You are sitting right next to it, and if it has an odor. All right? So these are all things that you can just observe without actually changing the matter. All right? And when I say changing the matter, that means turning it into something else. Because obviously we are causing a change when we melt something, but if you melt water, it's still water. All right? It just went from being ice water to water, liquid water. All right? So physical changes leave physical properties are just things you can measure and observe about your substances sitting right in front of you. There's a whole big longer list of things right here, but the real probably important ones I've got on the slide. I'm sorry, physical properties. Chemical properties page. But chemical properties Alright, so chemical properties are properties related to changing a substance. Alright, so i.e. changing the actual matter or the chemical makeup. Alright, so a lot of times you can think of this as is related to chemical reactions. So it's often, can the substance react and how will it react? Alright, so things that you'd list as chemical properties would be like the ability to react. Or it might be more specific, like metals react with hydrochloric acid. All right, or carbon hydrogen compounds react with oxygen, all right, when you burn them. All right, so these are all going to somehow be related to a chemical reaction. Chemical properties are harder to visualize because you have to get a reaction going for them to show up. All right, so if you're just sitting with oxygen in front of you, all right, it's not going to show its chemical properties unless you expose the oxygen to something it will react with. All right, that's in there twice. Then there are chemical and physical changes, which are very closely related to the properties we were just talking about. Physical changes are any sort of change that would leave your chemical molecularly the same. All right, so like if you were to take a piece of paper and rip it in half. All right, you're not breaking bonds when you do that. All you're doing is taking the paper and making it smaller. It's still paper, and the chemical that actually made the paper is still present. There's also anything that is a change in state, so boiling water, freezing water, melting water. All right, those are all physical changes because the water is still water. It's still H2O. It's just solid, liquid, or gas. All right. Another thing that is also a physical change, and this one I put a bunch of stars by because I have a lot of students who make a mistake with this one, but dissolving is a physical change. All right, so if you think about it, we've talked before about sugar water. All right, if you dissolve sugar in water, it still tastes sweet. All right, so you know the sugar is still there. The sugar didn't become something else. Same thing if you think like salt water. All right, if you've ever been swimming in the ocean or gargled salt water when you had a sore throat or something like that, it tastes salty. So again, even though the salt looks like it disappears and maybe has become something else, it's still there. All that happened was that you got water, salt, water, salt, water, salt, water, salt, water, salt, and you just can't see it anymore. All right? So definitely write this one down. And remember that is a physical change. All right? Chemical changes cause the chemical makeup of a substance to change. So it's going to take water and turn it into something else. It's going to take salt and turn it into something else. All right? So if you take water and you split it into hydrogen and oxygen, that's a chemical change because now it went from being H2O to being H2 and O2. All right? Another good way, if a question says a chemical reaction is taking place, it's a chemical change. If the question indicates that the chemical changes into a new chemical, that's a chemical change. Or the question may sit there and give you these 5 signs of a chemical reaction. And that is another way for them to kind of sneak in a chemical change. So these are something you definitely want to write down. The 5 signs of a chemical reaction are a color change, and we're talking in an extreme, a drastic color change. All right, so something like, you combine 2 clear liquids and suddenly it turns yellow, or you combine a blue liquid and a red liquid and it turns green. All right, something that you wouldn't expect to happen. So one color change that sometimes isn't an actual reaction is when you say you have like a blue liquid and you add a clear liquid to it and it becomes a lighter blue. That's just because you diluted the color. So that's kind of the only non-color change that I don't want you to get confused by. Another thing is if gas is given off, and you'll know this is happening because you will likely see bubbles. All right, so like in our Alka-Seltzer over here, the plop, plop, fizz, fizz sort of thing. So the Alka-Seltzer tablets are reacting with the water when they enter, and you can tell that reaction's taking place because of the bubbles that form. There's also energy being released or energy being absorbed. All right, so you can think of this as like exothermic changes and endothermic changes. All right, so if you combine 2 chemicals and suddenly the beaker gets warm, energy is being released, or if it gives off light, like these little glow sticks. All right, so that's energy being released. Energy being absorbed, obviously the energy would go into it, which would then make the surroundings cooler. And then this last one, it's pronounced precipitate. All right, so a precipitate forms when you combine 2 liquids and a solid forms. All right, so that is when a precipitate occurs. We will actually see lots of precipitate reactions in Unit 3 and Unit 4. But make sure you have these written down so that you can use them as a tool to decide if a chemical change is taking place. So on our slide here, we're going to determine if these examples are physical changes or chemical changes. All right, so make use of your definitions. Physical change, the chemicals you start with are the chemicals you end with. Chemical change, you end with new chemicals. Or you can keep an eye out for one of those 5 signs of a reaction, and if any of those are happening, then it's a chemical change. Or you can even, remember that if a reaction's taking place, that automatically means that you're forming something new. So pause the video, see if you can answer these, and then turn the video back on to get the answers. So, melting ice. Just thinking about it. I'm going to take an ice cube that's solid water and melt it into liquid water. Water becoming water, so no change there. That's a physical change. All right, dissolving sugar into water. All right, disappearing is not one of your 5 signs of a chemical reaction. And technically the sugar doesn't actually disappear. You don't see it anymore. But you can remember, if you taste the sugar water, you can tell the sugar's still there. All right, so we've got nothing actually disappearing. We have water and we have sugar. We just have water and sugar so evenly spread out that you don't see the sugar anymore. So that is a physical change. Dissolving is always a physical change. Burning wood. All right. Well, when I burn wood, it's going to give off light. It's going to feel warm. The wood goes from being brown to black, or even from being solid and like this big hunk of brown into like gray, just soot. So I would say that's several signs of a chemical reaction. We got color changes, got light being given off, heat being given off. That's a chemical change. Ripping a piece of paper. So if I take a piece of paper and rip the corner off, both things are still paper. It's just 2 pieces of paper instead of 1. So since it's still paper, that's going to be a physical change. Transforming water into oxygen and hydrogen. So I'm going to take water and I'm going to turn it into oxygen and hydrogen. Since that sounds a lot like I have new chemicals at the end, that one's a chemical change. Then reacting acid and metal. So there should be one word in here that kind of zones you in. All right, so focusing on this word reacting, that means a chemical reaction is taking place. That's a chemical change.